All right, then we have estimate activity resources. So now that we had the plan, now we got to estimate. So we're looking at the type, quantity, characteristics. You see that there? Type, quantity, and estimistics. Now, estimate costs, estimate activity durations, and estimate activity resources. See that they all have similar outputs. You get the estimates, you get the reason why you got those estimates, and then you may update some documents because of it. All right, so just notice that that's the same. Anytime we're estimating something, the output will be an estimate along with its basis and any updates to documents that you may have. So we estimate activity resources is the name of the process, output resource estimates. You'll notice that the name of the output is usually very similar to the name of the process. If you haven't seen that so far throughout the course, like start to pick up on that. It'll help you to not necessarily memorize, but just know, you know, when you hear something, you can tie it back. Resource requirements, estimate activity resources. Same type of estimating techniques. See, we talk about them in here. See something here. Yeah, we will talk about them. So within the slide, same tools and techniques, and then we'll use these inputs in order to get the resource requirements. So let's take a look. You have a project ID or maybe activity ID, and then the group where that resource comes from, the number of people you need. It's just one way to see it. It's not the only way. Same thing with the basis. We saw this same document when we were estimating durations for the schedule, estimating cost for the cost, and now I'm estimating resources.
Does resources speak specifically to the people that you're going to be using, or are we lumping in the cost of what it's going to take for them with everything else?
So, okay, good question. Right now, we're not looking at cost or duration. We're just looking at the resources we need. This is version 6 of the PMBOK that you're studying. When I got my PMP, it was version 4. There were different terms that were used. And I'm bringing that up to say this. In version 4, when you got to the schedule, you would actually define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity resources first, because you need to know the resources, then you estimate activity durations, then you develop the schedule. At that point in version 4, resources only spoke to human resources.
Okay.
By the time PMI, and so PMI, just know that like for every year, every 3 to 6 years, PMI looks to update the PMBOK or the project management body of knowledge, this sort of big book here, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens is they'll send out surveys to all the project managers and say, hey, what's new in the field? What are you seeing? And then based on that, they'll say, hey, based on what our responses, here's the changes we want to make. And they'll open it up for review. It'll be about a year's worth of time. PMs will be able to give their input. And then eventually they'll say, here's the changes, another review cycle, and then it becomes the next version, version 5, version 6. So this is in direct response to us as PM saying, hey, we don't just manage people resources, we manage materials and supplies, right? Sometimes physical resources. So it's not just people. So we moved it out from the schedule, the resources from the schedule, and we moved it here so that it all fits in its own knowledge area. Resources all fit with the resources. Now, I bring that all up to say that it's another example of when you're in planning, you are in planning, right? And each knowledge area you're going to hit. So you may estimate the resources. In fact, if you think about your projects now, Paul, everyone on this call, when you start your project, you're already thinking about resources. You're already estimating resources at some point. Sometimes you're thinking who's already available. So this process of estimating activity resources happens multiple times. And it can happen at different times in the projects. I also want to, let me stop the share. I want to say one more thing about this. So tomorrow we're going to get to execution, monitor, control, closing. Okay. When you're running a project and you initiate the project and then you get into planning, oftentimes before you fully fleshed out that plan, you start executing. So it is very common for a certain part of your project to be going on, and then you're continuing to work on other aspects of the plan. And so since the project is actually running, that means that you're also jumping into monitoring, controlling, because you now need to monitor and control the money that you're spending on the execution, and also where you're coming along with your planning. And if you think about the case study that we're it's been building and we're going through, that same thing is happening. They're not 100% fully fleshed out with the plan, but work is happening. Money is being spent. People are providing estimates. So at that, I'm saying all this to say that these resources here, while it's in this knowledge area of resource management, while you didn't see it until here, it's, just maybe if you're following this formula, you get to this point, you estimate your resources, you go back, you update your durations, you go back, you update your cost estimates, and then you go back and you update the budget. That's one way to do it, but nobody does it that way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. For PMI's sake and for the testing,
right.
Bring up resource management is going to be talking specifically to this step in the process within their guidebook, or can we think more broadly? Or are we going to need to think more broadly?
No, I don't want you thinking broadly at all.
Okay. Okay.
Save that for your day job. Okay. No thinking broadly on the exam. I want, so I do want you to think this way, like these conversations we're having are very pertinent for your job. But for the exam, no. Resources are, we're talking about people, machines, materials, supplies. And when we're talking about estimating them, it has no bearing on, or I should say, cost and time have no bearing on the estimation of resources. Estimation of resources will have a bearing on cost and time. That's where we get the project document updates, where it says, we'll get some updates at the end depending on the resources that you estimate.
Okay.
Thank you for asking that, because that's one that comes up. I probably would have jumped over that if you didn't ask. All right, so here is the breakdown structure. What happened? Remember, we saw a work breakdown structure. Here's the resource breakdown structure. Later on, we'll see a risk breakdown structure. All right, so with the project, then you need certain types of people. Remember, notice how we don't have names. So then we have personnel, we have materials of equipment, there could be supplies, and then you need this role, and in this role, we need these types of levels. So it's not necessarily people. You can go back in after the end, and then you can attach a person to a role. But right now, we're trying to figure out the roles, the materials and supplies, the machines we need. There could be even, there could be even the idea that we need to have some sort of, building space. We need team space, right? We need to have some sort of, what do we call that? Real estate, or, there's other terms, but, you might have one there. So that's the idea of having a resource breakdown structure. It's just to make sure that you can see everything that you need. You'll take some project documents as inputs, specifically the activity list, because that's going to let us know the types of resources that need to be accounted for to complete those activities. Also, any assumptions we might have made, the cost estimates, right, that we might have had, that might influence the type of resources we're going after, depending on how much money we have. EEFs and OPAs in this context, all right? EEF, where that resource is located and their availability, you have no bearing on that. That's outside of your control as a PM. So that becomes an EEF. Same thing with the skill levels of your team members. You have no bearing on that. You can fight for training, and you can, go to bat for the team and get management to give them better tools and all that. But that's still like you still have no sort of impact, on their skill level. That's just going to be outside of your control. All right, and then OPAs, you might have policies regarding staffing and supplies, or how you onboard people. Do you need to have a C with parentheses for contractors, all that kind of stuff. And then the same type of estimating techniques, we can analogously estimate and say, hey, we had a project like this and it needed these types of resources. So this project will need these types of resources. Or, you know, an activity requires 4,000 hours of coding and it needs to finish in a year. So, you know, if there's only 2,000 work hours, we're going to need 2 coders. And if we only have half a year, we're going to need 4, so on and so forth. All right, bottom up estimating, you know, most accurate, takes the longest. And we'll analyze all of this data, right? The skill set, who's full-time versus part-time, contract versus W-2, right? Materials and supplies, machines. We'll do all that, including make or buy decisions. This means we're going to do it in-house. This means we're going to source it externally. That's all make or buy means. Make or buy is, are we going to do it ourselves or have someone else do it for us?